questions you have. And just to keep it as uncluttered as possible, I'll let you ask questions at the end in the little questions box there, if instead of trying to unmute everybody and let everybody ask a question through the audio. All right, so let's get started here. Okay, so looking back at this event, these were the deadliest tornadoes in the state of Tennessee since the big April 27th, 2011 outbreak, which has now been 10 years ago. And most of those affected East Tennessee, but you probably remember that outbreak more for the devastating tornadoes in Alabama and Mississippi, but there were quite a few in East Tennessee as well. And these were the worst tornadoes in Middle Tennessee since the Super Tuesday outbreak way back in 2008. So if you remember that event, this has been the worst since that event, which has now been 13 years. So it's crazy it's been that long. And last year, 10 tornadoes touched down during the night across the state from the late evening on March 2nd into the early morning hours on March 3rd. And all 10 of these tornadoes in Tennessee were spawned by one single supercell thunderstorm that tracked eastward across the whole length of the state from west to east. And there were 3 tornadoes in West Tennessee, 7 in Middle Tennessee, and 1 in East Tennessee. And I'm going to talk about all those tornadoes here in a minute. And there were other severe thunderstorms and tornadoes with this event as well. A few tornadoes in southeast Missouri, southern Kentucky, and central Alabama, but none of those were even close to as severe as the ones were in Tennessee. And this was not a well-forecast event. We had anticipated a few severe storms that night, but not such a historic major severe weather event as occurred. It appeared that both instability and shear for this event, which are the main 2 ingredients we look for severe thunderstorms and tornadoes, it looked like they would be too low to support many tornadoes, and especially long-track, strong, and violent tornadoes. This event wasn't what we call synoptically strong. We didn't see any big low pressure areas that would be moving by the region. We didn't see any major upper level troughs like in most severe weather events that we see in this part of the country. And it was actually pretty chilly that day. Temperatures were only in the 50s and 60s with dew points only in the 50s. And typically this is too low for us to see significant severe weather and tornadoes across the state of Tennessee. Normally we like to see warmer temperatures and higher dew points, generally in the 60s for big severe weather events. And it's also very rare to have a tornado outbreak from just one supercell in our state, and it's especially rare to have just that one supercell track the whole length of the state, a distance of over 400 miles. That's prehistoric in itself. And needless to say, more research is needed from the meteorological community to fully understand how this severe weather event unfolded like it did. So for those of you familiar with the Storm Prediction Center, they're based out of Norman, Oklahoma. These were the severe weather outlooks for March 2nd and 3rd last year. And this outlook was issued that afternoon of March 2nd. So you can see on the top left there, the yellow oval is where there is a slight risk of severe thunderstorms expected, which is a level 2 out of 5 severe risk. And that's surrounded by a marginal severe risk of severe weather in the green shaded area. So most of Tennessee was in a marginal to slight risk for severe storms. But if you look at the probabilities for each severe weather risk, you can see at the top right, this is the tornado risk that's expected. Most of the tornado risk was focused on the Missouri Boot Heel, Western Kentucky, Western Tennessee, and Northeast Arkansas. And there was a small chance of a tornado extending into Middle Tennessee. There are a bit higher probabilities for severe winds at the bottom left. You can see there in the yellow oval, there was a 15% chance of a severe wind gust. And then at the bottom right, there's a bigger threat for large hail. That black shaded area indicates there is a threat for some significant hail in that area. And that did extend into West and Middle Tennessee. But overall, this is not looking like a major tornado event by any means. And these are the Storm Prediction Center's storm reports for March 2nd. Now this goes from 6 a.m. on March 2nd to 6 a.m. on March 3rd. So it's not midnight to midnight, it's 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. So these are all the storm reports that they received. Red circles are tornado reports, blue circles are wind damage reports, and green circles are large hail reports. And there's even a couple of black triangles on there you can probably just barely make out. And those are very large hail reports, hail over 2 inches in diameter. And there were even a few of those reports as well. So mainly this was focused on Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee up until 6 a.m. on March 3rd. But severe weather did continue even after that. There was, like I mentioned, those 2 tornado reports in Alabama, and there was some wind damage in Mississippi, Louisiana, and up into the mid-Atlantic across Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania as well the next day. But the main event was across Kentucky and Tennessee. So here's a map of all the tornadoes that touched down March 2nd and 3rd last year, starting from West Tennessee on the left all the way into East Tennessee on the right. So I know this map may be a little confusing, but right in the center of your screen, that's Nashville, and you can kind of see the 840 loop that goes around Nashville. And the red line going from the top to the bottom of the screen on the left side, that's the Tennessee River. So the tornadoes first started in West Tennessee, like I said, and they had 3 tornadoes over there. Then the supercell moved into Middle Tennessee, where we had 7 tornadoes in our area, and then it continued into East Tennessee, where they had 1 tornado over there. And here's a timeline of this event. You can see on the left there, I say a supercell forms near the Mississippi River around 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. So that's when the supercell first formed, and it formed right around where the Mississippi River is. And it continued eastward and eventually dropped its first tornado in Gibson County around 10:12 p.m. Central Standard Time. That supercell continued eastward, and then it dropped an Ef3 tornado in Carroll County to the north of Huntington. And that tornado lifted. Then another tornado touched down in Benton County that continued into Humphreys County, Tennessee, north of Camden. And that was around 11:20 p.m. There's another brief Ef0 tornado to the north of McEwen, Tennessee, in eastern Humphreys County. And then the supercell decided to take a break, and it didn't produce any tornadoes across Dixon or Cheatham counties. But once the supercell moved into Davidson County, where Nashville is, that's when it produced its longest track tornado, which was an Ef3 tornado that started on the west side of Nashville around 12:32 a.m. and continued for over an hour eastward through the city of Nashville, most of the eastern suburbs of Mount Juliet and Lebanon, before it lifted in Smith County, Tennessee around 1:35 a.m. The supercell then produced another brief Ef0 tornado in western Putnam County before the Cookeville Tornado touched down around 1:48 a.m. in the town of Baxter, and it moved eastward into the western side of Cookeville through 1:56 a.m. There's another brief Ef3 tornado to the southeast of Cookeville, but there's a pretty substantial break once again until the supercell moved into northern Cumberland County, Tennessee, where an Ef2 tornado occurred. And then finally, one last Ef0 tornado occurred in Morgan County, Tennessee. And believe it or not, the supercell kept going. It tracked north of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, north of Knoxville, and eventually moved into the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee before it finally dissipated around 5 a.m. So that supercell lasted for around 8 hours as it tracked the whole length of the state and produced these 10 tornadoes. Pretty amazing weather event. And here's a radar loop. I know it's pretty fast, but it shows the initial supercell tracking from west to east across Middle Tennessee at the beginning, and then it shows all the other showers and thunderstorms that develop behind that and then move across the area later in the night. So I'll let that loop here a few more times, and you can see how the main supercell here at the beginning kind of stood out. It was a pretty impressive looking cell, and after it moved into East Tennessee, thunderstorms just kind of blossomed all across the area. But none of these were severe. They're all just regular general run-of-the-mill thunderstorms, but they did produce quite a bit of heavy rain and some gusty winds across the area after that main supercell moved through. So I'm going to highlight some of the stronger tornadoes and show some of the interesting features about each one. And first I want to focus on the Ef2 Benton and Humphreys County tornadoes. So this tornado first touched down north of Camden, Tennessee in Benton County, and you can see the track of it here denoted by the yellow line. And not long after it touched down, it already started to strengthen to Ef2 intensity and unfortunately killed one person and injured two others here to the northeast of Camden in this general area. And the tornado kept going eastward and eventually crossed the Tennessee River into Humphreys County, Tennessee, and then kept going all the way over to just north of Waverly, Tennessee, before it finally lifted. And you can see the tornado didn't track in a straight line. It kind of wiggled back and forth to the north and south of its eastward motion. So it made kind of a squiggly path as it moved from Camden to the north of Camden, to the north of Waverly. And most of the Ef2 damage with this tornado was in Benton County, but the tornado weakened to Ef1 strength after it moved into Humphreys County. Now, this tornado was strong enough to be able to see the damage from satellites. So this is a Landsat satellite image that was taken a couple months after the tornado occurred, and it's a little hard to see probably on your screens, but right here in the middle of the screen, there's a little bit of discoloration in the tree cover, and especially here along the Tennessee River, you can probably see in this area, there's some lighter colors there where a lot of the trees have been blown down. And this is especially evident on the east side of the Tennessee River, where you can see a path pretty well there in the light greens and red colors. And I'll highlight it here if it's still hard to see, but you can really make out where that tornado tracked by the number of trees that were blown down. So when you get really strong and violent tornadoes, they can blow down enough trees and forested areas that you can actually see them from satellite imagery. That's a pretty fascinating feature. So after that tornado lifted, there's another brief Ef0 tornado in eastern Humphreys County, and then a bunch of large hail was dropped in Dixon County, especially in the Charlotte area, which saw up to baseball-sized hail. But no other tornadoes touched down until the supercell moved into Davidson County, where Nashville is located, and this is when it produced a long track Ef3 tornado. And this tornado was the first to strike the downtown Nashville area since February 13th, 2000. So it had been 20 years since the last tornado moved through downtown Nashville. And the tornado continued into East Nashville, where unfortunately 2 people were killed. And those were the first deaths in Davidson County from a tornado since the big tornado back in 1998 moved through the downtown area. So it had been, 23 years since the April 16th, 1998 tornado. And as the tornado continued into Wilson County and moved through Mount Juliet, unfortunately 3 more people were killed in that area. And those were the first tornado deaths in Wilson County since 1944. So pretty incredible statistic there. And the Nashville tornado ended up being on the ground for over 60 miles, 60.13 miles. And since official tornado records began in 1950, this is the longest known continuous tornado track in the database. And going back into the 1800s, we actually have tornado records back all the way to 1800. And some of those tracks, even back then, were known to be a little bit longer than that, but it's possible they could have been multiple tornadoes that were kind of combined into one long track. But even taking all those records through the 1800s into the early 1900s, this is at least the second longest known path length in Middle Tennessee history, and one of the longest in the whole state of Tennessee. So this was a very impressive historic tornado. And the picture on your screen there was taken when the tornado was crossing the Cumberland River in West Nashville, and it's looking northward from the area around Charlotte Avenue and 40th Street. So on your screen here, I've got a map of the whole tornado track of the Nashville, Mount Juliet, Lebanon tornado, and it's denoted by the orange track there. So you can see that the tornado touched down on the west side of Nashville, moved right through the city, and then kind of wobbled back and forth as it moved through Hermitage, Mount Juliet, over into Lebanon, and then started turning southeast as it moved into Smith County before it finally lifted to the southeast of the town of Gordonsville. So like I mentioned earlier, the tornado was on the ground for over an hour. It was rated a strong Ef3, and it was moving eastward on average around 57 miles per hour, and at times over 60 miles per hour. So this tornado not only was super strong, it was booking it to the east at a very rapid pace. So that didn't allow people much time to react once the tornado got to their area. And the tornado, once it moved through the Mount Juliet and Lebanon areas, that's when it reached its widest point, and it was 1,600 yards wide at its widest, which is almost a mile in width. And the tornado unfortunately killed 5 people and is estimated to have injured 220 people, and it caused over $1.4 billion in damage. That's an incredible amount of damage done by one single tornado. This makes the Nashville tornado the 6th most damaging tornado ever in the history of the United States, which is just crazy to think about. So I'm going to zoom in more on each county and show the track for Davidson, Wilson, and Smith counties. So through our damage surveys and some aerial imagery done by some folks at NOAA and some other companies as well, we found that the tornado touched down in the Bells Bend area of western Davidson County. So that's several miles west of downtown Nashville. And you can see the tornado moved eastward and strengthened pretty quickly to Ef2 intensity right as it was moving across the John Toon Airport area. And you've probably seen pictures of the damage from that area. It destroyed numerous airplane hangars and threw dozens of planes all over the airport. And that's where a lot of the damage dollar figure came from, was the destruction at the John Toon Airport. And the tornado continued eastward at Ef2 intensity, moved into northwest Nashville, just north of the TSU campus, continued to produce Ef3 damage as it moved through North Nashville, and then crossed into the downtown loop in the Germantown area, where it produced high-end Ef3 damage to numerous buildings in that area. It weakened a bit as it crossed the Cumberland River into East Nashville, but then strengthened again as it moved towards the 5 Points area of East Nashville. And unfortunately, that's where 2 people lost their lives. And there was even some Ef3 damage done in that area. There's one Family Dollar store that was completely leveled in the 5 Points area, which is definitely a sign of Ef3 damage. And the tornado kind of weakened a bit to Ef2 strength as it moved through the rest of East Nashville, and then crossed the Cumberland River again as it moved into the Donaldson area to the north of the Nashville International Airport. As the tornado continued eastward through the Donaldson area, it strengthened to its most intense point in Davidson County as it moved into this area far north Donaldson, where it produced high-end Ef3 damage and leveled several well-constructed homes here right on the Donaldson-Hermitage border area. And interestingly, the tornado made a curve to the southeast as it moved through Hermitage and crossed Old Hickory Boulevard, and then turned more eastward as it entered into Wilson County at Ef1 to Ef2 strength. So as it moved into Wilson County here, you can see on the left side of your screen here, the tornado strengthened back into strong Ef2 strength, and then it reached its most intense stage where it produced pretty solid Ef2 to high-end Ef3 damage for many miles across Mount Juliet into the western edges of Lebanon. And the tornado also reached its widest point in this area, where it was nearly 1 mile in width. And once the tornado crossed the Highway 109 area near Interstate 40, the tornado gradually weakened as it moved into the city of Lebanon, mostly produced Ef1 and Ef0 damage on the southern sides of Lebanon, and then tracked right along Interstate 40 as it moved through the Tucker's Crossroads area, producing mostly Ef1 damage, and continued to slowly weaken as it moved into Smith County. And finally, you can see here, as the tornado moved into Smith County, it started to turn more to the southeast, still producing Ef1 damage pretty consistently, and finally lifted here just to the southeast of Gordonsville, Tennessee, after over 60 miles on the ground. Very, very impressive tornado. And Nashville has been hit by many devastating tornadoes throughout its history, and I've shown 3 of the strongest ones here on the map on the screen. So the orange track is the tornado from last year on March 3rd. The yellow track is the April 16th, 1998 tornado. And the green track is the March 14th, 1933 tornado. And the March 14th, 1933 tornado is the deadliest in Nashville's history. It killed 11 people in East Nashville. And you can see all of these tracks are pretty close together. Both the April 16th, 1998 and the 1933 tornadoes tracked right across the state capital area. And all 3 tornadoes moved through the 5 Points area of East Nashville before their paths kind of spread apart again. The 2020 tornado moved almost due eastward, whereas the 1998 and 1933 tornadoes moved more northeastward. So pretty interesting seeing these historic tornado tracks side by side like this. All right, so now I'm going to show you some of the radar imagery from the Nashville tornado, and I'm going to use GR Analyst here. So hopefully you can see it on your screen. All right. So here on my screen, I've got, at the top left, I've got the base reflectivity from the Nashville radar. At the top right, I've got the base velocity data. The bottom right, I've got the storm relative velocity data. And at the bottom left, I've got the correlation coefficient, which is a product that allows us to see tornado debris. So first up, this is when the supercell was over the Charlotte area of Dickson County. And at this time, it was dropping baseball-sized hail here to the northeast of Charlotte. But the rotation you can kind of see here on the right, it's a little hard to see the rotation really well, but it's pretty weak at this stage as it's moving through Dickson and Cheatham counties. So I'm going to track eastward here. And as we move towards, this is about 12:20 a.m. You can pretty clearly see the hook echo of the supercell here at the top left. The radar's having a tough time seeing the low-level features in the velocity data here, but there's probably still some rotation going on. And at the bottom right, we're not seeing any indication of any tornado debris yet. And as we continue eastward and the supercell moves into Davidson County, you can see the hook echo becomes more well-defined with precipitation at the top right. You can see the rotation is actually increasing. We can see some brighter blues in here, which indicates stronger inbound winds into the radar, next to these red colors, which is stronger outbound winds. And it shows up even better here in the storm relative velocity data. Greens are colors of winds moving towards the radar, and reds and yellows are winds moving away from the radar. So we can see the rotations increasing here in western Davidson County. And now I'm going to zoom in on the supercell here. And so we've got downtown Nashville here on the right, and here's the hook echo of the supercell. And once the supercell moves into the Bells Bend area here, right about here, this is about 12:33 a.m., the hook echo is very well defined, and there's actually a pretty strong velocity couplet right here in the Bells Bend area. So the tornadoes most likely has touched down at this point, and in fact we can see here on the correlation coefficient at the bottom left, there's actually some very low values of CC, which indicates that there is in fact tornado debris in the air. So at this point we could say that the tornado is in progress. And as we continue eastward, once we move the supercell and the tornado over the John Toon Airport area, notice how the reflectivity here really strengthens, and that's because of all the debris from all the airplane hangars and planes got lofted into the tornado and the supercell, and that really reflects back that radar beam energy back to the radar site. So we were really able to see that the tornado was in progress at that time. And you can also see there's a very strong rotational signature right in that same area. It shows up really well here in the storm relative velocity, and we're still seeing a large debris signature. So I'm going to move it over here a little bit more, and I'm going to go forward a little bit, and we can see the tornado moves into the downtown loop of Nashville, just to the north of the state capitol. Right at this time, the radar beam is only a few hundred feet above the ground. Because we're so close to the radar site, the radar beam's not very far above the ground, and we're able to sample the tornado very well at this close range. And in fact, here on the top right at this time, the radar was measuring inbound winds as high as 118 knots, which is around 130 to 135 miles per hour, which is a strong Ef3 wind speed. So, and that matched the damage on the ground at the time. So very impressive winds on the radar. And as the tornado continued eastward, it looks like the rotation weakens on radar, but actually the radar was having a very tough time deciphering all the data because the winds were just so strong in the supercell. The radar was having trouble resolving all of that. And as we continue eastward, the tornado continues and passes just to the south of the radar site. This is where the NWS Nashville office is located, right here where the radar is. And it passes just a few miles to the south here as it moves into Mount Juliet. Now you can notice on the radar data that the rotation is definitely much more apparent here in the Mount Juliet area, and that's because the tornado had definitely strengthened. This is when it was reaching its most intense stage, and it showed up. You can see the hook echo very clearly here as it moves eastward through Mount Juliet. The velocity signature is very strong. Some of the winds in this area, if I can zoom in there, let me see there. They're as high as 134 knots, which is about 155 to 160 miles per hour. So a strong Ef3 tornado here on radar. And that tornado kept going eastward through Mount Juliet into the west sides of Lebanon. Still got a very impressive hook echo signature. See here at the bottom left, this is all tornado debris, and almost a mile-wide swath of tornado debris was being detected by our radar in this area. And tornado continued eastward, still very strong rotation apparent, but once it starts moving into Lebanon, you can see those values start to decrease as we keep on going. The supercell becomes a little more ragged looking in appearance, and it's definitely clear as it reaches Smith County that the tornado is beginning to weaken. And once the tornado crosses I-40 again here to the west of Gordonsville, it's definitely weakened by this point. The rotation has come down quite a bit, and it looks like it's falling apart here as it moves to the south of Gordonsville. But in actuality, we could find a path all the way down to the southeast of Gordonsville, and you can actually see that here with the tornado debris on the southwest and south sides of Gordonsville. So over 60 miles on the ground, strong Ef3 tornado, very impressive radar signature. All right. So now we're going to move over to the Ef4 Putnam County tornado. So as bad as the Nashville tornado was, the Putnam County tornado was much worse. This was the deadliest single tornado in Tennessee in over 13 years. So we have to go back to the Super Tuesday outbreak in 2008, February 5th, 2008, to find the last tornado that was as deadly as this one. And this is the one that hit Lafayette in Macon County that night and unfortunately killed 22 people. This is by far the worst tornado in Putnam County on record, and the worst in the Upper Cumberland area since the April 3rd, 1974 super outbreak. And most of you have probably heard of that outbreak before. That was a major tornado outbreak with tornadoes in every state from Michigan and New York all the way down into Mississippi, Alabama, and even Florida. So that was a huge tornado outbreak. And these are the first deaths from a tornado in Putnam County since 2003. So we have to go back almost 20 years since we've seen a deadly tornado in Putnam County. So this was another historic event in a major, major weather event. So the whole track of the Putnam County tornado is on your screen now, and it's defined by the red line. And then all the little triangles on your screen are where we mapped damage features ranging from EF0 to EF4. So myself and some of my coworkers, we went through and labeled every single structure with an EF scale rating for the Putnam County tornado. And you can see on the left, the tornado starts out weak at EF0, And it stays weak for a little while, but once it moves further towards Cookeville, it strengthens up to Ef2 and then all the way up to Ef4 strength before it starts to weaken again, and then really weakens by the time it moves into Cookeville. So just like the Nashville tornado, this tornado was moving east very fast, over 60 miles an hour. And like I mentioned before, this tornado was even stronger than the Nashville tornado. This one produced damage solidly in the Ef4 range. And we estimated winds as high as 175 miles per hour. Excuse me. Now, this tornado was not on the ground nearly as long, a little over 8 miles, and it was much smaller than the Nashville tornado. At its maximum width, it was about 900 yards wide. But I'm going to show you how that's a little misleading here in just a second. Unfortunately, because this tornado was just so intense and it moved through a highly populated area, it killed 19 people and injured almost 100 others. So just a devastating tornado. So here's another map of the Putnam County tornado. So this highlights the areas that saw Ef0 up to Ef4 damage. The Ef0 damage is in blue. The Ef1 damage is in green. Ef2 is yellow. Ef3 is orange. And Ef4 is red. So like I said before, the width of 900 yards is a bit misleading because the core with the strongest winds of the Putnam County tornado was only 100 yards wide. So it's about the width of a football field. And the length of the Ef4 damage was only about a mile long. So the vast majority of the Putnam County tornado's winds were in the Ef0 and Ef1 range. But that narrow core of really strong, intense winds, Ef3 and Ef4 strength, unfortunately moved right through several neighborhoods. And that's why we had so many injuries and unfortunately deaths. And very thankfully, the tornado weakened and lifted right before it entered the heart of downtown Cookeville, where it could have caused even more immense damage than it already did. All right, so now I'm going to show you some of the radar from the Cookeville tornado and show you why this one was just very difficult to see from a radar perspective. All right, so I'm going to move over here, and we've got Cookeville here on the right side and Baxter on the left side. Baxter is where the tornado started, so I'm going to fast forward in time here. So once the supercell moves into Putnam County, let me zoom out a little bit. You can see on the radar here, it looks like a mess. It doesn't have that classic hook echo shape that we had when it was moving through Nashville. It almost looks like just a big old blob of reflectivity. And there's not a really well-defined circulation. There is, you can see circulation here, but it's not super strong at this stage right by Baxter. As we move forward in time, though, we can see that circulation starts to strengthen here, especially northeast of Baxter. We can see these outbound velocities are increasing as well as the inbound velocities. And there's a little bit of a hook shape becoming apparent here in these higher reflectivity values to the north of Baxter. As we continue eastward, the circulation strength